Hey, this is Gary.
This is Mike.
And Daniel. We're not professionals. We're just three addicts sharing our experiences, strength, and hope regarding recovery.
Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to other addicts and to practice these principles in our lives.
Welcome to another episode of the 12th Step Podcast. This is Mike.
And I'm Gary.
And this is Daniel.
Good to be back together again, gentlemen.
As
it's
always.
Fun to get together.
Yes.
Fun to get together and podcast, and always fun to hear and to talk about some of our listeners and the comments that they write in. Tonight we have one from Kevin, and it's a great topic, one we haven't necessarily addressed, partly because it's having to do with a step that's sort of later down the path, and it's fun to see people writing in saying I'm dealing with some of these steps that are further down the way. So this is great. I'm going to go ahead and read this. Gentlemen, I'm really struggling with working my 11th step. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understand God, praying only for the knowledge of God, God's will for us, and the power to carry that out. How do I do this? I've always struggled with my relationship with God. More often not, I've found myself believing God is nothing more than a distant deity that is impossible to reach. Throughout much of my step work, I've really struggled with my higher power, and a lot of that struggle comes because I don't know if what I'm thinking, feeling, or being told is inspired of God. There's so many times that I'll be meditating and praying, and thoughts come to my mind, and I question that, is that mine, or is that communication from God? And if that really is a communication from God, then why, more often than not, does it not end up in a more positive way? So I guess my question really boils down to, do I improve my conscious contact with God, and how do I know that the messages I'm from are from my higher power and not just me or someone else manipulating that situation? And that's from Kevin. That's a complex question, and a complex series of questions in there, actually. This is great. This is a fantastic topic. So let's jump into it.
I'm just really grateful that, finally, after all of the philosophers and theologians of the world, or that we finally get to have a crack at it. I'm really interested.
There's been some really good people talk about this topic.
Yeah,
let's see if we can butcher it in the next 30 minutes, right?
Yep, that's right. So the first thing, there are a couple of things that come to my mind right away. Okay. Is the first word, sought through prayer and meditation, sought, seeking, looking for something. That implies a process. That implies something continual. Step 11 is something that you continue to work on. It's not a one and done kind of a thing. Steps 10, 11, and 12 are things that you practice for the rest. That's part of the lifestyle. So, and like anything else, you get better at it. The more you do it, the more you put it into practice. But I think the first thing that we need to understand is that to improve our conscious contact with God is a skill that takes time and effort to get good at. What do they say? Something like 10,000 hours before you're proficient in something?
Yeah.
All right. So we need 10,000 hours of meditation and prayer before. I mean, it's not a terrible comparison.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, it's actually a good comparison. I'm working on this step myself. You're saying sought, it's like here, talking to someone, I'm like, hey, I sought to get a degree. You go out, you go to school, you go to classes, you're being taught, you're learning the things you need to have said degree for whatever job or position you're working for. It sounds like it's kind of like that. You have to put in time and effort. It's not just going to be, I'm going to sit down, go climb a mountain, sit in this field, and a bush is going to ignite into flames, and God's going to talk to me. It's going to take time and effort. Just like learning a new language, we have to put in that time and effort to learn that language, and then when someone speaks it to us, we know exactly what they're saying. So, for me, I've been working on that, and I try to do it every day and just take a little bit of time and determine, okay, was I really fully connected into this, or was even though I was trying, was my brain focused on the 40 billion other things in my life that are going on, or did I kind of close everything down and try to be mindful and intentional in doing this one thing? Because, those outside things can, really distract us. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've sat to say a prayer, or I've gone to meditate, and like right in the middle of it, I'm like, oh man, did I turn the dishwasher on? Did I turn the water off outside? And then I know I'm out of that space, that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of thoughts. Those are all great thoughts. Good shares. I'm a couple things jumped in my mind. We're talking about step 11, right? I mean, this isn't the first time that we've addressed this idea of this relationship with God. I know in steps 2 and 3, had to have done some work there.
Yeah.
Which begs the question then is, what did we do in steps 2 and 3 that bring us then to this place at step 11 that we're uncomfortable with this relationship, if that makes sense? Because I think if we'd really, maybe the thing to do is, instead of addressing 11, is to go back to step 2 and 3 and to really, really hone in step 2 and 3 and understand what those are really asking in terms of, who is this higher power? Okay, if we feel like we've nailed that one down, then the second question is, do we really have faith or have some belief that he can restore us to sanity, that he can make us a better version of who we are?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, which is a key component of faith, right? I think that's really, anybody who has any kind of a belief of any type whatsoever, is this idea that if I'm willing to establish and do this relationship with God in a meaningful way, that may require some things of me. It may require me to give up a few things that I'm not, that clearly are in contradiction to what God has said that he wants me to do. That somehow, some way, I'll arrive at a place that I'm better today than I was yesterday. And that's moving me in that right direction. And in so doing, what I get out of that is that I'm different today than I was yesterday. That's the idea of step 3, right? That he can make a better version of me than I can make of myself. And so it's interesting then to come to step 11 and ask that question of, I'm questioning about where this. So I have these things that pop into my mind, and I can't make a determination as to whether it's me or whether it's God or what is it, and therefore I'm struggling with that. So
he has an interesting line that I think might. Let me just read it. He says, "How do I do this? I have always struggled with my relationship with God. More often than not, I found myself believing that God is nothing more than a distant deity that is impossible to reach." If you go into this process with that premise, then you're going to really have a hard time.
Yeah.
You're going to really, really struggle with it. And the step 11, like you were saying, Mike, we've already done some work, and it presupposes that God is something that we can increase our conscious contact with. It presupposes that prayer and meditation can improve that. It presupposes that we've already fundamentally accepted that if we turn our lives and will over to him, that things will get better. And presumably by this time we should have started seeing some evidences of that.
Mm-hmm.
So to lead off, and in my experience, it's always been better to lead off with strengths rather than weaknesses. You can sit down and in a very real. I always sit down and when I begin prayer or meditation, to help get me in the right frame of mind, I begin with gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
And I begin by acknowledging where I believe God has improved my life, has saved me, or has guided me.
Mm-hmm.
And I acknowledge those things, and that's typically where I begin, and then I go forward, believing that if I continue to, invest or engage in these things, that it's going to work. Does that make sense?
It does.
It does, absolutely.
Just kind of going along with what you're saying there, it actually sounds like God isn't the problem here. His higher power isn't the problem. It's his own doubt. It's his self-doubt that's really coming into play here. I'm just trying to find the spot here. Where he's like, he's talking about how he gets an answer, but he's not sure if it's from God or if it's just his own mind throwing it out, or if he's read something. I think, did he say read something or something like that? I'm assuming that and throwing that in there. But it seems like his self-doubt is what's playing havoc here more than anything inspired or being told to him by God. And we've all had those moments where, life is kind of chaotic and hectic, and we're like, oh, was that really inspired? Generally, something else follows along that's very similar to it. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I get it now. I missed the first one. Here's the second one. But it may be he's just has so much doubt that he's misfiring every time those signs come up or those messages pop up.
Can I make an observation
Yeah.
here? First of all, I want to take this completely out of the universe of addiction, right? First of all, the question that he's raising here in this relationship with a higher power or God or this being is a universal question. I mean, I think it's literally existed since the beginning of time, right? The beginning of man living on the earth and that relationship with God. We're not talking, and so it's really fascinating then to bring that universal question that all of mankind is experiencing to then drop that into the universe of addiction. And the reason why I think it's fascinating is because, at least in my own experience, if there's ever evidence of God in my life, it's through the process of recovery. That's one of the most evident places where I believe that God is very active in my own life and my own existence, is because of the successes I experienced through the process of recovery. So I unlike many other folks who are out there who are living their life trying to establish a relationship with some higher power or some God through religion or whatever it is, whatever mechanism, reading some set of scripture, adhering to some standard, all of those things that they participate in, that's universal, completely universal. But the place I see results of all of that more than anything is through the process of recovery, where I do know that I am better today than I was yesterday. And I definitely know that I'm better this year than I was last year or the year before that as a result of my recovery moving forward. And I know without a question in my mind that's the hand of God in my life, who's very interested in my recovery from the things that were killing me in my relationship with my wife. So I never question whether God exists or is answering or any of those things when I'm working my recovery steps. That's the first thing. The bigger thing of this is that I'm not sure if it's a question about recovery as much as it's a question about that every person in all of mankind is trying to deal with, and that is how do I establish this relationship, and how do I make it a meaningful relationship? And the only thing I can tell you from my own experiences is that's lots of study. I spend hours a day into what I consider to be a standard set of scriptures and trying to understand God and trying to understand who he is and how he behaves and how he works. And there's loads of examples from Genesis all the way through whatever set of scriptures you want to say to find examples of how he interacted with other people. And it's based on those experiences that I can say, wait, that fits my life, right? I mean, you might as well put doubting Thomas and Kevin in the exact same room at the exact same time, right? Are we not talking about that exact same thing? Is the question of, is this person really a God? And how does God communicate with me, and all of that stuff? And if so, look at Jesus's brother, right? I mean, all the way along saying, look, I'm pretty much sick of you talking about who's your father and who's not your father, and yet somewhere down the road, all of that came out. All of that came out. Everyone is dealing with that very issue. The question is very personal, and then how does God communicate with you individually? And I think that's the message for Kevin is that instead of wondering all the time as to whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, it's the fact of, okay, I need to spend some time really understanding how it works. Really, I think that's it.
I mean, for me, I've found that, I think God communicating or a higher power communicating to us is very unique.
Right.
For
Very
me,
personal.
I, since starting recovery, I have found that sometimes I will get, besides people coming to me and saying something that's like, oh my gosh, that's the answer I've been looking for. Sometimes I'll find it while reading a book. Sometimes I found it while, just watching a movie, and there's just this line or this thing that just jumps out and hits me like a ton of bricks, and like, okay, there's the answer. There's been times where I've been kind of the doubting Thomas, like, no, that wasn't it. And then it comes again. No, that's not it. And then it hits me again. It's like, okay, fine. All right, 3 different times. This has got to be it. I think we all kind of go in and out of those phases. But I think what Kevin really needs to, kind of focus on is, how does he feel like he's getting those responses?
Mm-hmm.
Is it through books? Is it through reading the scriptures? Is it through watching a movie? Is it through having a neighbor speak to you, or one of your kids saying something? That's even happened to me, where one of my kids have said something just like they don't know what's going on, and suddenly they say something that is out of the ordinary, but it's that exact answer I needed. And also realizing that sometimes those answers just can come from left field, just a random stranger on the street that stops and says hello.
Another thing that strikes me is he says, and if that really is a communication from God, then why more often than not does it not end up in a more positive way? Now that's a really vague statement. Okay. And I had this conversation with my son.
Yeah.
Okay. And what it really boiled down to was he was struggling with something very similar. And he says, I don't understand. I'm trying to do this, and this,
Mm-hmm.
And nothing is working out, and it's not turning out well, And I told him, I said, well, everything that you've talked to me about this point is that you want to do this, that you want to do that. And all of those are good things, and all of those are laudable
Mm-hmm.
things, but that sounds more like what you want to do.
Yeah.
That sounds like your will. And then who are you to say that they don't turn out more positively? Something
Mm-hmm.
I've learned about God is that he plays the long game.
Yeah.
And living in a world of instant gratification, where my expectations are met in the way that I want them to be met, and then having to, turn that piece over to God and realize that, it takes time. It's in his time and in his way. And a lot of times I don't see the positive that comes from it. And a lot of times I may never see the positive that comes from it,
Yeah.
And maybe a lot of times things that I do and say, it's kind of interesting, because there have been a number of times when I've tried really hard to do something and I thought it was an absolute disaster. Absolute disaster. No good has come from it. I was embarrassed by my efforts, frustrated, and I'm just ready. I'm done. I'm ready to go home. This is done. I'm finished with this. Only to find out, in some cases years later, that I had said something that somebody had never forgotten, and it made all the difference.
Yeah.
But that hadn't come back to them for quite some time. So in the moment I would have said, oh, absolutely, that was a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
But years later, looking back on it, it's like, no,
Yeah.
it wasn't, so yeah, I think.
Yeah, I have a very similar situation. So using my own personal story. So before we moved up into this area, we lived down further south, and my ex had decided we were going to sell our house because I had gotten a job up here. I was driving back and forth. No one wanted to move. Our kids didn't want to move. I didn't really want to move, but she really wanted us to move.
Mm-hmm.
And she just kept pushing me about it. And I'm like, no, we don't need to do this. And she just kept pushing. And finally, she's like, we got to do this, and I prayed about it, and I got the response. And I remember it clearly, this move will be full of hope and healing. And so I'm like, all right, I guess I'm supposed to do this. my family literally fell apart after we moved up here. But things fell into place the right way they should have for me. It took some time. It didn't look like hope and healing. It looked like everything just imploded and it was the worst thing ever. But after I got through that storm, and I started, fully diving into recovery, those components of hope and healing started clicking into place, and more that became true. So sometimes, with Kevin's situation, maybe you're still kind of in that storm where you haven't got to the other side of it, where things start clicking into place and things start looking better. Because there is sometimes, you got to go, it's always darkest before the dawn, those sayings. You got to go through that briar patch before you can get to the other side. Sometimes you take your scrapes and your bruises, but eventually it does work out. Especially when you feel so positive about it and you're seeing growth and change. Because he's never going to lead you down the wrong path where you're just getting beat up over and over and over again. That's what I've definitely learned.
I'm actually going to read something from the 9th step promise that's really the embodiment of both of what both of you were saying. And just you'll hear these words literally as if so they're the SAA words, 9th step promise, but the two experiences that you both just shared are literally. So this is right from the middle of it. No matter how far down the scale we've gone, we'll see how our own experience can benefit others. And I think Gary related that. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We'll lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us, which is, I think, the things that Daniel were identifying. And then this sentence. We will intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle us, and we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Again, I think that's the 9th step promise really pulls in my mind anyway, the very things that we're talking about that may be difficult for us to identify, but that are happening around us, and that we can see those tangibly, particularly if we look backwards. We can see where we're standing at this point in time on our path and look back and say, wow, those were periods of time that I was an absolute mess, and recovery was one of those things that as it came into my life, it started to put the picture into focus, and I could see the fact that God was helping me along that path. And I honestly think that's going to be Kevin's experience. Maybe difficult at first, maybe difficult to see, but I'm certain that if he's working as step 11, he's been at this for some time. And I've got to think that he can certainly see the hand of God in his recovery experience to that point. It may be difficult moving forward and challenging him in ways, but what a great opportunity, right? There's a gift in that.
Yeah.
No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
I think any time that we can spend time trying to understand our relationship with a higher power is a good thing. It just simply is a good thing. And to be honest with you, as our lives and our experiences changes, so does our need and desire to deepen that understanding with a higher power. I am not the same person I was a year ago or 2 years ago in terms of my relationship with my higher power, and a lot of that has been recovery related, but it's also been just I needed answers. I simply needed answers, and I think each one of us have experienced that to some extent. We can't go through life without getting the kind of answers that we need, and it required some deep digging that step 11 and some of the other steps have provided to navigate that and to find that out, because without it, I'm not sure we can continue doing this work. It's that hard.
Another thing that came to me while you were talking was very often when I sit in meditation and prayer and ask for God's will in my life and maybe give me a little bit of guidance on what I could do differently, it almost always results in me needing to do the thing I want to do the least.
Yeah.
And in the moment that doesn't feel positive. It's like, oh man, dang it. That's going to be unpleasant. That's going to be uncomfortable. That's going to be hard. And it's always turned out to be good for me And it's very rarely turned out to be easy or pleasant in a lot of cases. But
I agree with that. I
Yeah.
think also that one of the easiest metrics that we can use to navigate as to whether, was this revelation, was this some sort of answer to my prayer, was this something I think that's manifest every single time in how we treat others. When we find ourselves granting more grace today to those around us and their follies and their mistakes, family members, spouses, kids, parents, whatever the case may be, when we find ourselves granting grace at a greater, in some greater measure, then I think that's an answer for Kevin. I think that absolutely is something that we can tangibly believe that, okay, I think that all right, I may not necessarily have a clear path of what it is I'm supposed to do, but I do know that God is clearly present in my life as a result of my efforts, because the manifestation of that is always an outward manifestation. And it's how we present that, I think, to other people, how we interact with them. Are we much more patient? Are we much more loving? Are we much more kind than we were, some time ago? And those are visible manifestations of this whole concept of God being in my life.
I have two more thoughts. First one is usually I can tell something is good for me or comes from God, because I do believe that all good things come from Him. So I think that's a really good litmus. If it leads me to do something good that will leave me more than I was before, that might mean that I've learned something, or I have more opportunities, or I'm stronger, or it just somehow leaves me more than I was before. Then I have a great deal of faith that came from God, if it leads me to somewhere good or more. If the reverse is true, if it costs me more than it gave, usually if it was quick and easy, then I have a tendency to think that it did not. The other thing is that excuse me, by the very nature of the 11th step, again, you're engaging in a process, and a lifelong process, and one that you stick with, and that you have to exercise patience in as you're seeking to do this. It's not something, even though it can be frustrating, but you don't give up on it. And you keep going, and you keep seeking, and then you watch. And you do this, for lack of a better word, exercising faith. Okay, not leading out with doubts, but you're doing this having, faith that if I do these things, that it's going to make a difference in my life. If I turn my life and will over to God, He is going to restore me to sanity. I can find redemption. And sometime the answers that you seek can take years and years, before I marvel. I've been doing recovery, for 11 years, a little over 11 years. And it surprises me how sometimes the answer that I seek, or the healing that I need, required me to be 3 years into it, 5 years into it, 10 years into it, or whatever it was, until I got to the point where I had grown and developed the capacity to receive that which was given, or what I was seeking. And that if I had somehow tried to get that earlier, it wasn't going to work. So sometimes time is also the answer, and it takes time.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. Yeah, these things are, I don't believe that God is a quick fix. I just don't believe that. I don't think, in fact, I was listening to a song today by Jelly Roll, which is kind of funny. The words from Jelly Roll are, I only call on God when I need Him. And I think that's fascinating insight from an individual who lives, as near as I can tell anyway, a fairly godless life. I don't think and I think it's fascinating that that he makes that he made a song out of that. That this is what I do. I call on God when I need Him, when things are going tough, and so then he makes the other observation in his verses. He said, "How can I expect a savior if all it is that if this is really the relationship I have with Him, is just call on Him when I need Him." And I think that I think what Kevin is really trying to get at is this: is I want him. I want him to be more present in my life. I want him to be more engaged with me, and I want a relationship with him. And I think you said it perfectly. This takes time. Relationships of that magnitude and of that type takes some time. I don't believe that God is an unwilling participant. I don't believe that at all. I think He's very interested in each one of His children, and so I think He's interested in having that sort of relationship. But that's not going to happen overnight. And I don't think it's something. I don't think we get to use Him sort of like a grocery shopping list, right? Like I want this and I want this and I want it by Friday. He's not a delivery service. He's not Uber. Bring it to me by Friday at 4 when I really need it. It's a relationship that's different than that, and I think that plays very nicely into the recovery environment. I really do. I think He's there, and I think He's interested in moving us forward in a meaningful way. So, it takes us a long, long time to develop our part in it, and as a result, His response to that. It takes some time to understand how it all works.
I would also say, it's not always a take relationship. What are you also doing to give back?
Yeah, what are you willing to sacrifice?
Yeah.
What are you willing to...
Are you willing to do some service? Sometimes we have to do that. We have to
I think
give.
Most times you do.
It's not. It has to become a give and take type relationship. And when we give up our time, we sacrifice things. I think that's when things really happen, and that's sometimes where these big things happen where we have to lose all these things because it breaks us down to a humble point where we can finally start hearing those things because we pushed God away, we put up all these walls, and that's when we can finally hear.
I think too that we need to remember that God has a tendency to, when we ask for things or we're seeking to develop things, that He gives us opportunities to grow rather than just part the windows of heaven and grant it to us. You know what I mean? There's a, if you pray for patience,
He gives you
opportunities to
be patient.
Be patient, exactly, and so on and so forth. And I really do.
It may look like a challenge. That may literally look like a challenge.
Yeah, and might feel initially like not a positive thing.
Right. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt your thought.
No, you didn't. I was done.
And
well,
it's that time.
Kevin, I wish you the very best. I hope that I know we've danced around this subject and topic a lot, if not only in this podcast but in others. But it's a difficult one, it's a challenging one, but it's also a very personal one and rewarding one. From my own experience, it's been a very fascinating path, and so I wish you the very best as you move forward. I hope that you find the answers that you're looking for. I wouldn't discredit anything. As I read the Bible and as I read anything that I consider to be most valuable, it's amazing to me all the different ways that God has communicated with people. I mean, I can tell you right now that if you talked to me in a burning bush, I'd have been scared shitless and ran away, right? I mean, that would have freaked me right out and run away. I see other examples where he's, how about with Saul, where he heard a voice, right? I know what I'd have done that. I'd have freaked out and ran away. That'd have been so. My point is that it's very personal to the individual, and it seems to work for those particular people. So nothing I can say is going to give you the exact answer on how it is that he's going to be able to communicate with you kindly, and it's going to work for you. But I wish you the best, obviously, in that path.
I would just like to say, Kevin, it works.
Yes.
It really does. And for what it's worth, just let me express I know that God is real. I know he lives, and I know that that he loves us, and that he is intimately involved in our lives, and that he will be as big a part of our lives as we allow him to be. But we do have to seek him. and we have to seek him diligently. And there are times that where you feel close and just at complete peace, and other times where you can feel like you just got to get through to the other side. You can feel lost or even abandoned. But it has been my experience and continues to be my experience that God is very, very real, and it will be worth your effort. So keep doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I would just add to that as well, just because you're working through step 11, you've reached almost the pinnacle of the 12 steps, doesn't mean it's going to get any easier, especially with this where you're having to improve your conscious contact with him. I'm working through step 11 myself, and, I have some pretty trying stuff going on right now, and as we've been talking about this, it's just been coming to my mind like, all right, that's why all these things is happening, because I'm having to rely on my higher power. I'm having to lean on him more, having to communicate with him more. Sometimes it just can't be easy. We don't get the easy button where we can hit it and we're done. Sometimes we have to go through those hard things so we can learn how to communicate with him better. So be aware of that. Maybe as you're working through this and you're trying to understand what things are what and why some things don't come through as quickly as you'd like or as easy, maybe look at those and see what gifts or what opportunities are coming out of those things for you.
All right.
Gentlemen, it was a great discussion. Very much enjoyed that. And, with that, this is Mike saying, do the work necessary to find the peace that recovery can bring.
And this is Gary saying, do the next right thing.
And this is Daniel saying, find the humility in your recovery.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like this episode, please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find us.
As a fellowship of recovering addicts, Sex Addicts Anonymous offers a message of hope to anyone who suffers from sex addiction. Check out saa-recovery.org.